All right, we are now recording. Good morning, everyone. I can't believe it. We are moving right along. Hold on one second. Let me get my phone. Now, everybody, if you're watching the syllabus, we're coming towards the end. This is week 6, week of the 13th, right? This is the 13th. Yes, it is. Okay. Yes, because week 5 was last week. This week we are moving into Dr. Costin's book. We are going to, we're going to move into chapter 1 today. I want you to read Theology of African American Worship if you haven't done so already. That's in chapter 1. Theology of African American Worship. That's in chapter 1 of Costin's book. And you have your discussion forum. Your discussion forum, I want you to read chapter 1 first. You got to read chapter 1 before you answer it. And I'm going to tell if folks didn't read it because they're just going to start talking about diversity just off the top of their head. But you got to read chapter 1, and it is fine to quote Costin's book in your discussion post. So when you read chapter 1, your question is, why is the concept of diversity in African American worship important? So now in this second half of church worship, we're focusing more into, and isn't this every day is Black History, but I love how we are in February, we're in Black History Month, and now we're focusing on, yes, church worship, but now we're going to focus in this book more on African American worship experience. We're going to talk about the video summary assignment in just a second. Next assignment, you will have quiz number 2. That's going to be due on Sunday night. Make sure you get that done. I feel like it's something else. It is something else. Check your announcement tab. I want you to go to your Atlanta Metro email. This does not come from me. This comes from the school. So please make sure, I want you to check your Atlanta Metro email for a survey. It's a class survey, so it won't come to your other emails. So I want you to fill out that survey, give your opinions and everything about the class. And it's okay, but we want to make sure we get 100% participation for our survey, and it should just take you about 3 to 5 minutes to complete it, okay? So let's make sure we get that done. Last week, let's talk about your assignment real quick. And I'm grading those. African American worship experience slides us right on into where we're going to be talking about today in chapter 1. It moving into what is, good morning all, African American worship. As I'm transitioning, I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint for today. We do have a video that we're going to watch, and I'm going to set that up in just a second. If you have any comments, any questions, any observations about your video summary in African American worship assignment from last week, you can open your microphones at this time. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint. Did you find anything different, anything um, intriguing? Okay, okay. All right. All right, everybody, I want you to pull your attention to the screen. Let me see, who can I see? Sometimes when I pull the screen up, I can't see folks. Mr. Lester, I can see you. Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. It says Theology of African American Worship. Super, thank you so much. All right, everyone. We're in Costin's book now. We're in chapter 1, and we're going to take a pertinent shift into what does it mean or what is different? What's the context? What's the theology, the background, what birthed African American worship, as opposed to just talking about church worship broadly. Before we go on any further, I want you to look at the picture on the right-hand side. It's pretty an old picture, but I thought this picture was pretty interesting because it had a myriad of different people there. So it looked like it was slave people, but then on the left of the gentleman, looks like this is probably the preacher, a black preacher. They look like they're white people there as well. So I picked that picture. I said, oh, this is very eclectic, multicultural there, and tells a story. All right, we're going to talk about the theology of worship. And if you have your books, you can follow along with me. A theology of worship. And so let's just pause real quick. When we talk about the word theology, before we go on any further, theology, if you've been with me for some other courses, we have addressed that particular word. Theology is what? What would we say theology is?
The study of.
Uh-oh. Say it again. I didn't hear all of you.
The study of.
The study of, keep going.
Religion.
Religion, or be a little bit more specific of
Study of God.
God. So it's like, how do we really can't study God, right? But it's like theology says, what do we think of God? How do we see God? How have people seen God, or how has God revealed God's self to individuals over the years? We know that the creator doesn't change, right? But the people are expanding their sense of theology in their sense of understanding. And yes, Reverend Marshall said religion, and it does help us. Theology helps us to understand religion more so in part, different religions, but more so in part in this particular course, we're talking about Christianity, right? All right, so African American worship is so rich. It has so many layers. It has so many depths to it. Oh, let's say this before we move on. If somebody says that all African Americans worship the same way, what would you say? Would that be true or false?
It's not true.
That is not true. That's right. That is not true. You know, everybody is different. Everyone is going to worship different ways. So look at the first sentence there. Our African American worship is rich. Like I said, it has layers, it has depths, regardless of the denomination. So whether it's Methodist, whether we're talking Catholic, whether we're talking um, even with Methodists, you have different denominations there. It doesn't matter. It's rich all across the board. African Americans are going to gather and offer praise to God, but as we just said, it is not going to look the same from place to place. There may be some similarities, yeah, but it is not going to be a complete snapshot from this church to that church, from that denomination to that denomination, and that's wonderful, isn't it? No person is everybody's different. You may find similarities, but people go to houses of worship where they feel comfortable. So they like the particular style of worship where they go. And if they don't, they find another place where they like that style that fits their personality. African American worship, as we're going to talk about today in the video I have for you, it is so rooted in Africa. And I know we're in Black History Month, but I hate sometimes how we keep things just to February. We've got to make sure that we make a concerted effort to talk about it all year round. Where do certain worship practices, and to educate our people on where do certain worship practices come from? Why do we do what we do? Why do we wear what we wear? And if we start digging, if we start doing the research, if we start really uncovering maybe the basis of your denomination or whatever it is, I'm telling you, it's going to go back to roots in Africa. African societies or African individuals or cultures, they lived in what they called, excuse me, everybody, a religious universe. So I want you to jot that down. The African societies, our ancestors lived in what they called a religious universe. What does that mean? That meant to them that everything was considered sacred. Everything that a person did was considered an act of God. They looked at life, African societies looked at life in a holistic point of view. What do we mean by holistic terms? What do we mean by holistic? Like,
Altogether is what you mean?
yeah,
We're all in it all together, not only humans, but creation as a whole.
right. So the African, watch this, before we go anywhere, we got to get this part. African society saw everything as religious, everything, or should I say, I don't want to say religious, everything as sacred. I'm looking out the window and I see squirrels. I see a squirrel going up the tree. I see a tree. I see the sky. I see a building. And for the African ancestor, the squirrel is sacred. Right? We don't want to run over the squirrel, right? When sometimes the squirrel runs out in front of our car or something, but we don't want to hurt the squirrel. But really, tell you the truth, I just saw a bird, right? We're probably not really thinking a whole lot about squirrels, other than, they're just moving around in our backyard. But the African society said that even the tree has life. The tree is sacred. The tree has a purpose. Here's some more birds going. Everything has a sacred purpose and is an act of God. So they didn't see that their existence as in a vacuum. They saw their existence, I think Reverend Marshall said, as we're all working together. My existence is going to help you, and your existence is going to help me, and to help the birds and the grass and the water and everything. But even the water, everything was of God. Nothing, I'm working on this computer, right? And so that even this computer is of God. So they saw life as holistic, and the tools that they use, and the ways that they interacted throughout their lives all had to do with their religion. All right. So, and you stop me anytime if something comes to mind. I hope that you see that my slide changed. You should see a praise house. Okay, great. This is what bothers me sometimes in modern, what do you call it? Modern education. And I think this is the debate that if you have children or grandchildren in the schools now, I think this is the debate a lot with the curriculum, is that it is not holistic. And we know that our African ancestors, right, had a whole life before slavery. So our story didn't just start at slavery. We were doing well before then. So we are picking up here I just want to just give a caveat. We are picking up here in Costin's book at slavery, but she mentions that, we're carrying, or our African ancestors carried their spirituality with them. And I just find that to just be so awesome. All right. Here they are now struggling for survival. I want you to keep your eyes on that little beautiful praise house. It's very small, right? The struggle for survival. I want you to go to the bottom, and I have some questions for you, and we're going to raise these as discussion. So now we have our African ancestors are here in the Americas, or Central America, South America, the West Indies areas. The struggle for survival has now pushed Africans to worship. The struggle for survival has now pushed them to worship. All right, so everybody, I want you to imagine that, yes, we're in Georgia, but what if we just all of a sudden found ourselves in a little strange land, just picked up and moved to another country, where they don't speak English, and we can't find a church like we like, and we can't find the food like we like, and they don't have the TV shows like we like, everything that we have been comfortable with up until now, it is now gone. How would you feel being an alien in a strange land? Open your microphone, just pause right there. In a strange place, how do you think you would feel?
Afraid.
Afraid, sure
And
enough.
lost.
Afraid. I'm writing this down. Lost. I want to get it in the chat. What else? Put this in the chat. Good morning, good morning, good morning to those who joined us. Afraid. Where's my chat?
I would feel confused.
I know that's right. I heard confused, afraid. I heard lost.
It reminds me of the scripture where it says, how can we sing a song in a strange land?
That's right. I'm glad you picked that up. That's why I used that word.
That's what
Yes.
comes to me. So that is a feeling that people have had when they've been disconnected from their homeland or their roots or whatever. How can we sing, or how can we worship in a strange land?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So the words I hear you saying, we would feel confused, afraid, lost, strange, disconnection from home.
Apprehensive.
Apprehensive. Yeah, like what's gonna happen tomorrow? I don't know. Yeah. Probably physically hungry, if we're used to, think about it now, we're used to going to our refrigerator, we're used to going to our microwave, we can go to our pantry and our cupboards and we can get the food that we like, right? But now we're out in some weird place and we can't feed ourselves the way that we want to. We can't exercise the way that we want to. And now we can't worship the way that we wanted to. Okay, so now we're feeling this kind of way. I'm gonna go back to our lesson. And I am sure this is how our ancestors were feeling. The next question for you is, what would you lean on for support? So we're feeling alienated, we feel scared, apprehensive, hungry, confused. Who or what are we gonna lean on?
The word of God.
Word. Yes. Okay, I heard each other, the word of God. our spirituality?
Yeah,
ahead.
I think that, there's a lot of misconceptions and I think false information that we've been taught about the Africans who came here. They would have leaned on the God that they knew before they came, because we've been taught that we were heathens. We didn't know God, but Africans came knowing God or
We
a
knew
God.
God. Yes.
So they would have pulled back from what they remember their ancestors had taught them.
Yes. And actually there's a slide, I'm gonna get to that, where it addresses exactly what you just said, Miss Gloria. So we're gonna come right back to when you said that the miscommunication, the misnomers that we didn't know certain things. Our ancestors had faith. Our ancestors knew God. Okay, so they knew God. Now, here's the thing. Look at this little praise house. So they knew God already coming over on this horrible voyage, right? The Black church was born out of the struggle to survive. Now, what did they do? They leaned on each other. What did they bring out? They brought out their spirituality. They brought out their songs. They brought out their faith, and they leaned on each other. And they were like, "Look, if we don't have nothing else, we know that we have faith." So the Black church became a community of refuge. There was nothing safe about being on nobody's plantation, right? That wasn't safe. But when they got together, that was safe. Nobody was going to hurt you in your church gathering. Okay, so let's look at the top above the praise house. They gathered. That should be they gathered. They gathered. The gathered community. I'm sorry. First gathered in secrecy. Secrecy. So these invisible communities were not established like we see today. Like there's a church, a physical church on every corner, right? Or we can pull you up on YouTube. No, they would hide away in the evenings and go down, it's called the brush arbors, go down by the trees. Many times, plantations might have been near water, go down near the water and worship. So enslaved worshipers would get together, they would sing, they would encourage each other. But what were they doing? They were pulling out their faith, not faith that they learned once they got to America, but faith that they already had, spirituality that they already had. So how could they sing in a strange land? They did. They got together and formed their own informal, we don't know, no order of worship, right? It just moved how it moved, nothing printed, it just moved. Okay, so now I want you to look at this little teeny. Of course, this is not during slavery time. This is a little bit more modern. But from what I was told, this particular praise house, I want to say, and you can see on the right-hand side where it has been refurbished and probably includes some type of electricity in it now, where you see on the left hand, you see the meter. But these little praise houses were constructed as little places for the ancestors to go and do just that, gather and worship. So I want you to remember that. Let me get this before we go to our video. There are certain things that we say in Africa we can pull to our liturgical practices. So many liturgical practices go back to Africa. Okay. Actually, let me go on the left-hand side real quick. Although African Americans may share many common worship practices, remember what we said in the beginning, we shouldn't assume that all Black congregations are the same. We know they are not. They are not. Let me just pause real quick. Let me look at you real quick. We say that all Black congregations are not the same. No, they're not. In your experience, give me some differences. What have you seen in your, not that you were studying people at that time, but what have you seen in your observation of going to different, if you have, going to different Black congregations? And we know that they're not all the same, but how are they different?
Some have music, some don't.
The way they worship, some of them use music, some don't. Some express their feelings in animated ways. Some sit quietly and meditate.
Awesome. I'm putting this in the chat. Yes, in some churches where I have visited, they were very exuberant. And some, I'm going to put exuberant. I think that's the best word I can say. I mean, they would get up and clap and dance and run. I mean, the spirit would hit them. They would just run and move. And other churches that I've been in, nothing wrong. They were very quiet. Some people might clap their hands. Some people may not. Some people might say an amen. Some may just keep it kind of quiet to themselves. Okay. Miss
I think
Gloria.
first time I heard of the liturgy was in an AME church, you know, and Baptists, that's not a term they use. So that's when I became familiar with that.
Very good, very good, very good. Well, that's a good observation. So remember when we talked about
Proclamation.
Proclamation, very good. In Susan White's book, what is said may be very different from one Black church to another. We do, like you were talking about the liturgy, responsive reading and things like that. Other churches may not. Other Black churches may not. Maybe they might read their scripture at a different time. Some people may stand for scripture reading. Some people may not stand for the scripture reading. That's what we mean when we have observed that if somebody tries to say, oh yeah, they're all the same. No, they're not. No, they're not.
Okay. Other things, Professor, is the songs they sing. Some sang out of the hymn books, and then some sang off the hip. It's the same song, but it's a different style.
Let's definitely put music in. Yes. The music is different. Some churches we've been in, the music may be more contemporary. Some may have more hymns, contemporary. Yeah. At my church, we do a hymn. We do a hymn every Sunday. It's like an opening hymn. But other Black churches that I've been in, they don't do any. But I love my hymns, but that's another story.
Yeah,
Hymns of theology. Reverend Marsh, I'm sorry.
Hymn. I was going to say we do an opening hymn and a hymn of praise. There's two of them, and we love our hymns as well.
So opening hymn, a hymn of praise.
Congregational hymn, I think that sometimes they call it.
Congregational hymns. And also we would have, how do you pray it? Like a prayer hymn sometimes. Prayer or altar, like during the altar call or something, we may sing a particular hymn. But yeah, so those are the ways that, especially with music, and I think who mentioned instruments earlier? The instruments are going to be different. Some may have I went to one and all they had was an organ, and it was just so beautiful. Other churches, they're going to have an organ, a piano, a full band. I mean, and it's beautiful as well, you know? All right, let's go back to our lesson. Many liturgical practices go back to Africa. When we say liturgical practice, the things that we do or say during the worship experience is part of the liturgy. So African worldview believes these particular things, and we see this in Black worship. God created the world, that God is in charge of the world. Y'all, it's a hymn and it's on the tip of my tongue that we sing. This is my Father's world. So there's a hymn that we sing that even speaks to that African worldview. African worldview says or feels that humans are part of the creation. We're a part of this wonderful world that God made. They believe that there's a sacred cosmos, that God is in charge. They believe that there's a communal solidarity, community, that we're responsible for one another. Holistic, and my little thing is over top. Okay, holistic relationships. Okay, liturgical African worldview believes that everything is holistic. We don't exist in I'm here for me and nobody else. You know, everything is in relation to something or somebody else. An African worldview also believes in a cosmic rhythm. Let me just pause right there. Cosmic rhythm. What do you think that means? There's a rhythm.
Okay, a world, a world rhythm. Everything in life is in rhythm. Everything in
That's
life
right.
is in a cycle. I'm
That's right.
saying you got a carbon cycle, you got a nitrogen cycle, there's a life cycle for us. Everybody
Life.
got their season, and on and on. I mean, as the world turns, the days got a cycle.
That's right.
The morning, the sunrise, everything's got a cycle. All of it's cosmos.
That's right. There you go. There you go. So the African world views that everything is happening in relation to something else, and death happens and birth happens. And I'm looking outside at these trees. These trees looking kind of barren right now, but in about a few weeks, right? They're going to be budding and leaves are going to be there. So they believe in there is a sacred rhythm of life that we can't do nothing about, right? But we're in it. It's like a merry-go-round, right? We're in it and we're moving, and the African worldview respects that rhythm. Okay. All right. How we doing? Okay. Okay. This gets back to what Miss Gloria was saying. I want you to look at, and then we're going to go to our video. I want you to look at this slide. This comes from Miss Costin's book. I think I'm on about page 7. It is very important for us, of course, as African-American people, but as we study this, and as we study African-American worship, we have to understand, one, that our enslaved ancestors brought their spirituality with them. They practiced it, they leaned on each other for support. Oh my goodness, how are they going to get through? Because they needed their faith. But the dominant culture, the slaveholders, the white people at the time, was the dominant culture. What did the dominant culture do to the enslaved Africans in terms of their religious expression? So as Miss Gloria said, it was this I spelled that wrong. It's persistent. I'm gonna change that. They had a persistent negative attitude toward African religions. They said that the way that you worship is irreverent, and how you move is not how we move. You're not supposed to move and things like that. And the mode of expression was wrong. And so you see this persistent negative attitude, and not just in worship, but we see it in so many different other ways that came from our African ancestors, that what they did or how they expressed themselves was wrong, but yet, but yet we could build places, and we could, take care of your children and all of those other things. We would, we were smart. What did the dominant culture do? The dominant culture also imposed a system of beliefs that was not viable for those marginalized people. So what the enslaved Africans did was, look, you want me to believe that, but I'm gonna take what I already have, okay, and work with it, and I'm gonna work it into what the, I guess you would call it master or whatever, wanted them to do. Let me just pause right there. You can open your microphones again if you would like. This goes back to the dominant culture giving this persistent negative attitude that how the African worshipped was wrong, or how they moved was wrong, how they sang, how they preached was loud or something like that. Any questions, comments before we move on? Uh-oh. And we saw, and we'll see this. I don't want to get too much into the other chapters and also into history, but as the enslaved Africans begin to move and get their freedom, right? They're like, look, we want to worship how we want to worship. We don't want to continue to go to your church because we want to be free. So then you see the spawning of denominations. You see Reverend Marshall is AME, and we see that pull out from a white Methodist movement. And they're like, look, we want to do our own thing. We may not worship as quietly as you all, which is nothing wrong with worshiping quietly, but it was already in the African ancestors to, yeah, you ever feel some music and you just really getting it, and your hands get to going, and it was just in them to move and to be flourish and to flourish and to move and to dance around. That is African culture. Okay. That was Africa. Go ahead. Yes. Good morning, Miss Carolyn.
Good morning, everyone. What I want to say is when you speak of African culture, you're speaking of various tribes. All these
Correct.
Tribes were brought together. They were enslaved. Some of them have never been together. Some were enemies of each other. So on this slave ship, and then when they came to the shores, they were put together. What is in them cannot be taken out. You may want to change it, but they had their own spirits of worship. They had their own tradition. It's just like us today. If we try to go against what our spirit says, then we're in contradictory to our own beliefs and faith. So with the tribes coming together, that's the reason why you have different ways of worshiping, because they came from different tribes, different part of Africa, and they were put in one area, and they could not help but come out of. They can listen to and see what the master was saying, but they couldn't get away what was inside of them, that DNA, that innate spirit that was there. So that's the reason we have what we have.
That's right. You can't get away from what's already inside.
Yes.
And even today, just isn't it awesome that we're in 2023, and as we're studying this, those what's the word, remnants, traditions are still there. I mean, that's something to be happy about.
Yes.
Y'all keep talking. I'm gonna set up our video.
Professor, even children know the rhythm. You don't even have to teach it to them. It's automatic. It's in them to shake or to move or to clap or to feel the rhythm. It's in us.
You bring up a very good point. I'm gonna see if our time might be a little short today. I'm gonna find this. See, I'm making my note because y'all know I'll forget. There is a video, and I'm gonna find the right video that talked about African movements. And there was a video they showed, just regular African children, and they were just dancing to the music. And then this researcher found some African American children in the city, and they were dancing. And he put them side by side, and they were dancing. I mean, it was just like a few things were different, but I mean, they were going and they were doing the same thing. Those children had never seen each other before. They had never shared videos of what they were doing, but it was the same, movements, and we shaking our hands and head. It's just in us. It's just in us. All right, that was good. Let's go to, let me see if you can. All right. Let me know if you can see on the screen where it says The Black Church in a Multicultural Kingdom. Thank you, Reverend Marshall.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play it. Reverend Marshall, you seem like the only one I can see right now. Let me know if you can hear.
So February is Black History Month, and I want us to take some time over the next few weeks to highlight the unique experience of Blacks in this country. Not just their presence here, but more specifically, I want us to consider their faith journey. So over the next few weeks, we're going to explore the Black church within a multicultural kingdom. Now, honestly, that might sound contradictory to some, but I want you to understand the significance. There is a rich faith history for all believers to consider that rises purely and uniquely from that African American experience. And it is only when you begin tracing that history that you discover the vibrant gospel witness that was originally brought here in chains, but now continues to shine brightly for Christ in African American congregations across this country. And here's the deal, because that's not a value proposition over what is better or what is worse as some might perceive. It's just an acknowledgement of God's extraordinary grace showing up in the most unvalued places. Now, you might have the understandable question of simply, why does the Black church even exist? And maybe you even have a more probing question like, why would a multicultural church, which is actually a diverse integration of many races, why would it affirm any effort that seems to be defined by segregation? Well, the answer to that is simple. The Black church in America did not arise from casual preference. It was born from faith-filled perseverance. Some would argue that slavery was actually the vehicle through which Africans received the gospel from their slaveholders. But a closer examination of history reveals the rich heritage of African Christianity and shows the manner in which their existing faith was actually preserved, despite enduring the evils of slavery. In other words, the reason the Black church exists is only because many of those enslaved Africans, torn from their homes, bound by chains, deprived of every measure of basic human dignity, it's only because they came to a single conclusion in response to their oppressive reality. They said, we're going to worship the Lord anyway. And that's exactly what they did. Private gatherings, according to oral history, sometimes in the dark of night, from plantation to plantation, they persisted amongst these newly enslaved people, desperately seeking to hold true to their spiritual identity. One author described it this way. He says this, work time already ran from sunup to sundown. Time for worship was taken from the brief period left for the personal needs of sanitation, sleep, food, child rearing. This spiritual nurture must have been highly treasured indeed to motivate the sacrifice of such limited and precious free time. See, the fact that these overworked and neglected people would leverage what little free time they had to take the life-threatening risk to prioritize worship is absolutely remarkable. And they did this primarily undercover, all while their captors would take another 100 years before they ever acknowledged that these Africans even possessed souls. See, understand, this truth is nothing short of convicting, especially for a culture of modern believers who in a context of our extreme opportunity, have reduced our access, our rhythm, our priority of worshiping God. We've reduced it to a matter of personal convenience. See, they weren't allowed to worship God, but they did anyway. And we have the freedom to worship God. And so often, we just don't want to. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think there's an awful lot for us to learn from the legacy of the Black church.
Oh my, let's talk. Let's talk. Let me come back to you.
Powerful.
That was powerful, wasn't it? The last part got me and really convicted me. When you, okay, let's go back. Let's unpack. I saw y'all jotting some notes down. I was writing notes too. The gentleman said our ancestors were brought over in chains. But as they started these worship experiences, it was, I wrote this down, it was born from perseverance. Yeah. Perseverance. Did y'all hear that? That these worship experiences were born out of their limited free time. What do you think about that? So they had no, I mean, who has time? You're a slave. Who has time? You work from sun up to sundown. They're beaten, they're tired, and probably hungry, I'm sure. They're not eating well. But that spirituality that's in you said, you know what? We got to go down. We got to worship tonight. And they couldn't worship freely. Go ahead. I see Miss Gloria.
I was thinking about when my children were in school, because he talked about that they did child rearing, worship, they took care of their sanitation, their dinner. I'm thinking about my evening, how you get all that in after work. And I didn't work from sun up to sundown. It was just an 8-hour day, so it's remarkable that our people were able to, had perseverance, had that in them.
You are right. They had to get back to their living quarters, take care of the children, and if the child was small enough, probably was in there. But when they're old enough, they can come work alongside of the parent. Worship, cleaned up, took care of themselves as best as they could. Reverend Marshall, I saw your mic open.
Yeah, now I thought it was so precious too that out of all they was going through, they took time out to worship. And here this day and time, we got so much, and we won't even say thank you for our food. It's remarkable where they came from, and we seem like just forget. We have forgotten where our forefathers came from and what they did and how they struggled. Our children, and not all of them, but they won't even say thank you for the food we're about to receive. They won't even say thank you now. And so I thought it was remarkable.
Wow, very powerful. Very powerful. Anybody else?
Miss Berry, I think that,
Go right ahead.
that it was powerful too in looking back at what they went through back then. I think their worship was where they found their peace and consolation. It was during that time
Peace.
that they found their inner peace and consolation, because the outside world was so hateful and so bad at that time for them and their children. So I think
Right.
it's that worship, that's what they did to find inner peace and consolation.
So the worship experience, and so remember they formed these places called praise houses or brush arbors, where they would just literally be in the middle of these trees, right, or by water. As we start to read, in Costin's book, and I'm going to find it, there was something about water. They would place like a water barrel in their, what do you call it, gathering place. Because if they were talking, of course, they didn't want to hear nobody talking. They didn't want to hear them praying. They sure didn't want to get caught preaching. But the water will absorb their sound. So I'm gonna see if I can find that. It's in Costin's book. All right, before we wrap up here, there's one more slide. Remember, we talked about this negative attitude towards Africans and African religion. And even until now, even now, there's still this what's the word, y'all? This like kind of haughty look, like, oh, what is that, or that's wrong. And so why do you think, why is that, why do you think there's still a persistent negative attitude towards African primal religions? And when we say primal religions, the religions that our African American, excuse me, our African enslaved ancestors came over here with. Why do you think it's still a negative attitude towards it?
Because I think it's just part of the pattern of diminishing anything Black. You know,
Yeah.
you can always on YouTube or Facebook find some video or whatever with the Black church, and you don't find those things with other churches. But I think that it's just to degrade and diminish whatever we do.
Whatever we do, right. And we know this is Black History Month, right? A lot of the inventions that we made, the patents were stolen and given to white people. And once we started doing our digging and our research, it's like, wait a minute, we made this. Don't say that our invention was inferior and then you came and took it.
And you look at the inventions, they made them because they were doing that work. They made it so their jobs would be easier.
Easier. Hello. Right. The work that we were assigned to do.
Yes, yes. I read an article about DNA, and DNA. They said that DNA has memory,
Yeah.
and so your
Mm,
DNA carries the memories of your ancestors, and that's why the Africans who came here didn't come alone. They came with the DNA of the ancestors who worship God.
yeah. Oh, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. That's deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to go too off. We're going to get on here on this right-hand side. But I even think that, as Miss Gloria talked about the DNA, what's in our DNA, I even think as you look towards the 60s, as you look
Yeah.
towards the 1950s, even if you looked after slavery, Reconstruction, and things of that sort, that helped us as a people to
Yeah.
know that it doesn't look pretty, it looks just downright ugly, but that DNA of strength to keep pushing when you can't get on the bus that you want to, or you can't go to the school that you want to. Well, guess what? They burned your whole town down, you know. Okay, let's finish this up here. African people sought to know God. They sought to know God. African people who found themselves in America, they now started to express their knowledge of God or their love for God in different ways. And I think who said that? I think Miss Carolyn said the different tribes. And remember all of the, could we say like, were all of the, we say all of the churches the same? No. Were all of the Africans the same? No. Right? Things that were similar, surely. Oh, yeah. But they were not all the same. All right. Doctrine and creeds were not important to them. But knowing God and having that relationship with the Creator was important for them, to give them certainty, to give them faith, to give them clarity about things that they had no clue. Even as time progressed, and you began to get someone who was literate, African American who was more literate, and to be the preacher, the African American preacher would then express what God wanted them to know, even if they couldn't read the scriptures themselves. And this is on page 8 of Costin's book, and we're going to finish up here. The hearers, or the people that were receiving the sermon in these primitive churches, right? The hearers would participate in the worship experience, and they would claim the reality of their experience knowledge, because they wanted to seek God. They wanted to seek to know the Creator for themselves. Not because the master told them, but what had been found time after time again is that our African ancestors, in their modes of worship, it wasn't just something to do. Remember in the video, it was born out of perseverance. And they were persevering and pushing to get to this worship. Why? Because I got to know this God that we're talking about, that we're singing about, that we're praying to, that we're depending on, because we don't know where we are. All right, let's pause here. We're doing good. Any questions, comments on chapter 1, Theology of African American Worship?
Okay, the the worship styles from church to church, wasn't that created by conventions? What I'm saying, like the National Baptist Convention, didn't they? Don't they dictate how the Baptist churches are supposed to be run? Sequence of worship, the repertoire of worship, and the Methodist church, isn't it? Don't they do the same thing there? All right, and so that's why everyone is germane to itself, so to speak. You know, the Catholic, the Pope, you know what I mean? There's a repertoire that they do, and they can't change from it. They don't change from that.
They won't change. Yeah, they won't change much from it. I know exactly what you're saying. So let's take, for example, I'll take what I know, right? Methodist, right? And so the Methodist church, the word Methodist, cut the word in half, method. And so John Wesley, his whole point was that, of course, well, he was white, he wasn't black, but there was a method to the worship experience. And we still do see that today. Does it mean that all Methodist churches are going to still do it the same way? No, but there is a similar pattern, if that's the best word to say. There's a similar pattern, Mr. Lester, that you will see in Methodist churches. There's a similar pattern you may see in Baptist churches, Catholic churches. They're going to say and do things and have a liturgy that the Methodist church just doesn't do. So yes, you are correct. Now, even let me spin that again. So let's say Reverend Marshall is at an AME church, And I haven't been to your church, right? But I've been to several AME churches where one is real quiet. It's AME church. They gonna say that they're gonna do the same thing. And the other one, I've been to another AME church in I've been to Bethel. Uh Bishop Reed was there, Reverend Marshall, and we used to sneak up to Bethel, and we used to I've always been Amy Zion, but we would, as teenagers, we would sneak up to Bethel because Bethel was lively. It was more lively than our church. And as teenagers, we wanted to go, and at that time, they had drums, and I mean, they would be singing, and they had the choir and everything. So I say all that to say, Mr. Lester, even within a denomination, and they still have the same order of worship, it's going to be a different flavor based on the people who show up. Maybe because of age, or maybe just because of where they're located, or just because.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
okay,
good point.
all right.
But this is a good part because, and then in your discussion post, you're going to talk about the concept of diversity. I don't want to give it away, but I want you to really dig in that because um Mr. Lester really helped us with that. There's diversity even within denominations. You're not going to get the same flavor at this Baptist church as you would at that Baptist church, or this non-denominational church. It might be different from that one, and it's okay. Anybody else before we wrap up? All right, all right. This was a good discussion. Good discussion. I hope you all have a good day, good week. Don't forget your quiz. Hey there, Mr. Walter. You were driving. Be safe. I'm glad you didn't try to do too much now. Yeah, be safe. Make sure that